fun. We'll be underway here in just a minute for you guys in round number 3 of 9 here from Knoxville. Again, fire your questions away at SCG Live, hashtag SCGKNOX. We'll be answering them all weekend long.
So, Joe, with a main deck Aetherling and 0 main deck copies of Elixir of Immortality, I like this list. That's how I would build it.
We've got ourselves a stomping ground into an Elvish Mystic to get round number 3 underway. Parnell going to start off at 18, while Lossett will just play a copy of Hollow Fountain before passing the turn back. We'll see if Parnell has maybe a Domri on turn number 2, but instead just a Temple. So not an untapped land, does get to set up his draw a little bit here with the Scry and get things underway here. Let's put the stop card to the bottom.
Very powerful hand here for Justin. Looks like he has Domri, Stormbreath Dragon, Courser, a lot of tools to play with.
Scavenging Ooze as well is what he's going to play here before passing the turn back over to Lossett, who will take a draw. Picks up a copy of Syncopate, going to play one of those white border islands before passing the turn back.
Joe is a big fan of the revised island.
Blood Crypt going to come into play untapped, for Parnell, going to go down to 16, taking some damage here, but doesn't mind too much in this matchup. He's going to try to play a Domri with a mana available to pay for Syncopate, which Lossett actually does have in his hand.
Heads up play, playing the Blood Crypt untapped there.
That's going to resolve. Domri's going to come in. Looks like the elevator is going up. Take a look at the top card, and it does not look like a hit, so leave that on top. Will Parnell. An attack here for 3 is going to put Lossett potentially down to 17.
And this is a small misstep on Justin's part here. Generally speaking, once the Domri resolves, I would rather attack first and then pump. You see Joe opts to cycle Azorius Charm here, but if Joe had decided to use, the Azorius Charm on the Scavenging Ooze there, or at least it locks him out of having that play available to him.
Mutavault going to come into play here for Lossett as his 3rd land. Doesn't look like he has a Detention Sphere, but looks like a Banishing Light is at the ready for the Domri. So Parnell could already tell that was going to be removed in some fashion. There are now many ways for Planeswalkers to be taken care of from blue-white control.
Yeah, it's curious for me exactly how many copies of Banishing Light are going to end up in these lists. We've seen usually 1 to 2 to supplement the 4 copies of Detention Sphere thus far, but that might be subject to change with all the Abrupt Decays that are floating around.
Backup Domri in the house does not hit, however, as Overgrown Tomb is going to come into play tapped, and then an attack here for 3 yet again. Going to put Lossett down to 14. Joe going to take a draw here. It looks like he picked up a Jace. The big question, does he have the 4th land? And he does, in the form of Godless Shrine.
So Godless Shrine is in this deck because there are 4 copies of Nightveil Spectre in Joe's sideboard, so this is a basic plains that can cast Nightveil Spectre.
But you do have to pay 2 to play it untapped, and that's what he does. He goes down to 12, and then he's going to cast Supreme Verdict. Take care of the Ooze and the Mystic before passing the turn back over to Parnell, who will untap those 4 lands. He'll take a draw. You see the Stormbreath Dragon going to tick up the Domri. Now he's going to play the Forest and the Dragon and come across for 4. So now Lossett's going to need an answer to the 4/4 flyer.
And this is the type of recipe that the Jump Monsters wants for the matchup. Of course, Justin would rather be hitting with the Domri, but the mixture of Planeswalkers and some hard answer threats, forcing Joe to tap out on his own turn to contain the board, giving the opening for some haste creatures to be impactful. Although Joe does have a 2nd copy of Supreme Verdict to answer that Stormbreath Dragon. So there is a plus from Domri, finds a copy of Palakranos, a tapped Overgrown Tomb, and Palakranos enters play for Justin.
As big as the Hydra is, it's not a card that's very scary in this matchup. It's just kind of just some big dumb oof that just hopefully gets to rumble in and deal 5 points of damage, but it's pretty rare as Joe's going to play a Jace.
The text box does not matter for the most part, and it doesn't have haste, so the blue-white can answer it with Banishing Light, Detention Sphere, Supreme Verdict pretty easily. So it shows you Magic's quite a bit of a different game now, where 4 mana 5/5s with power are not really good in every single matchup.
Lossett going to tick down the Jace, going to turn over Sphinx's Revelation of Plains on the Celestial Flare. You see his hand, he's got 2 revs already along with the Syncopate. So even though we're making fun of Palakranos at this point, the 5 points of damage it can deal can put Lossett down to 3, and there's also the potential for a Monstrosity activation as well that can make things very difficult for Joe. So here's the split. You see the Plains and the Flare, so it actually is going to help Joe quite a bit. The rev's going to go to the bottom. Parnell pretty scared of actually playing a longer game here. And that kind of makes sense. The problem is that Lossett already has 2 revs in his hand, so favorable split there for Joe.
Yeah, little does Justin know that the Plains and the Celestial Flare are more valuable to him individually than that copy of Sphinx's Revelation.
Yeah.
So Joe actually got to take the best and second best card in that split.
Pulachronos, the reveal there from Domri. You see Domri's up at 7, so now it's threatening its ultimate on the next turn. Joe's going to need a Detention Sphere, another copy of Banishing Light to get the job done. The problem is he's only got 1 Banishing Light in his deck, so he's drawing the 4 Detention Spheres here to take care of that Domri. You also saw in Parnell's hand that he has Stormbreath Dragon. Along with the Courser, I think the thing he's considering is, do I cast the Dragon? And the answer is a resounding yes. So he's going to put the 4/4 flyer into play, and he's going to send them both sideways. Lossett going to cast a flare. There goes that. Going to leave the Dragon in play because it's actually more difficult for Lossett to answer than Pulachronos.
Yeah, protection from white's a valuable text box here, and the monster's power could matter next turn as well.
Lossett picks up a copy of Elspeth. And as appealing as that card is to cast in this situation, he's going to cast it. He's going to cash in Jace first, going to turn over a couple of cards, a Last Breath, an Island, and a copy of Deicide. What that is not is a copy of Detention Sphere. So it looks like we're going to have a Domri ultimate here, Patrick.
Yeah, and if you're wondering why, play Elspeth and minus it to kill that Stormbreath Dragon isn't really that attractive of a play for Joe right now, that's the reason.
So here's your split. You see Last Breath versus the Island and the Deicide. Domri's ultimate, it's a doozy. Creatures you control have double strike, trample, hexproof, and haste. Always threatening that in this matchup against the Revelation decks. It's rare that it gets there. Oftentimes it'll get to 6 or 7, and then a Detention Sphere will take care of it. However, Lossett was not able to find one. He's going to take the Last Breath. He's going to put the Deicide and the Island on the bottom of his deck. What can he do now?
And this is the way that John Monsters needs to play these kind of games. You can tell it's not like Joe doesn't have the tools to take over this game. He just may not have quite enough time.
Lossett going to attack with Mutavault. Going to go after the Domri and just simply pass the turn back over to Parnell. He's going to take a draw here. Looks like he might be in line for a play along the lines of Last Breath. Targeting my Mutavault here as it's time for Monstrosity on the Stormbreath Dragon.
Yeah, Joe also had the option to Sphinx's Revelate for 1 to stay alive if all Justin did was attack with the 4/4.
Either way, the 7th land of Monstrosity on the Dragon's going to get the job done for Justin Parnell. He wins game number 1 over Joe Lossett. Judd Monsters up a game over Blue-White Control. You've got Joe's deck list in front of you. What are the sideboard options?
He has a Celestial Flare, a Pithing Needle, 4 copies of Nightveil Spectre that I mentioned before, a Gainsay, 2 Dispels, a Deicide, 2 copies of Blind Obedience, and 3 copies of Archangel of Thune. This is a pretty, 4 and 3 of dense sideboard for a Blue-White Control player. Usually you see a lot more one-ups here, Joe being a lot more decisive this weekend. I think you're going to see the Blind Obediences come in. They're very good, of course, against haste creatures, which Justin has. You saw Stormbreath Dragon. You can reasonably assume that Mistcutter Hydra is in his sideboard as well. I think the Archangel of Thunes are a powerful way to steal a game potentially, and he's going to want the extra Pithing Needle as well, a way to just answer the Planeswalkers that are so problematic for his deck.
Other side of things are going to get better for Justin Parnell. 2 copies of Rakdos Return, 3 copies of Mistcutter Hydra, 2 Lifebane Zombies, 2 Golgari Charms, Vraska the Unseen, a Whip of Erebos, 2 Abrupt Decays, a Sire of Insanity, and an Ultimate Price. He's able to attack this deck from even more angles now. Gotta love Abrupt Decay to take care of Banishing Light and Detention Sphere. Gotta love Sire of Insanity. If that resolves, it's very difficult for Blue-White Control to beat. Golgari Charm going to be able to trump those enchantments as well as Supreme Verdict. Vraska lets you come from a different angle. Whip of Erebos the same, along with Mistcutter Hydra, which is a difficult card for Blue-White to answer, and then Rakdos Return as well. So he does not want to lose to Rev decks this weekend.
So you're pretty experienced with Jump Monsters. How are you making room for all these cards? I mean, you're talking 8 or 9 sideboard cards to come in. There's no really obvious cards to remove besides, let's say, Mizium Orders. Even Dreadbore provides utility against Planeswalkers. So how are you making room for all this stuff?
I don't really have a lot of interest in Mizium Mortars. Don't care too much for Scavenging Ooze. That's 5. And then I actually am pretty happy to remove Elvish Mystic as cards 6 through 9. I just don't think that those provide a lot. You can also skimp a little bit on either Pulachronos or Gore Clan Rampager. The cards that you're bringing in are so powerful that you're going to have to cut some cards to fit them in. One of the things that you end up doing by doing this is you lower your creature count a little bit, so your Domris get a little bit worse. But the fact that Domri can still threaten its ultimate does change the way that the opponent has to play the game. So, presumably you're boarding in 3 Mistcutters is 3, Rakdos Return is 5, Charms are 6 and 7, Vraska's 8, Whip is 9, Abrupt Decays are 10 and 11, Sire of Insanity is 12. That's a lot of cards, obviously, and there's no guarantee you have to bring all of those in, of course. But you say 2 Mizium Mortars, that's 2. You could say Dreadbores will be 3 and 4. Oozes are 5, 6, and 7 Mystics. That makes it 11. You can maybe skimp a Pulachronos or a Rampager. You can definitely make room.
Sure. So you would still prefer to keep in the Caryatid instead of Elvish Mystic, even though your opponent has shown you Celestial Flare?
Yes, because black mana is too important.
Okay.
Because if you take a look at the mana base over here, you got 4 Blood Crypts, 4 copies of Temple of Mana, and then 2 copies of Temple of Malice, along with the Temple of Malady. I mean, that gives you 11, where before you had 9. You know, part of the reason you want to leave Elvish Mystic in is the fact that you can cast a turn 2 Domri. You know, that's obviously a really, really big deal. And then you mentioned Celestial Flare, the fact that the Mystic can actually be the creature that you sacrifice instead of a Stormbreath Dragon. But the games where you don't have black mana, and a lot of the time you're going to want to have multiple sources of black mana, because you want to be able to do something along the lines of, you know, cast a black spell and leave up Golgari Charm. You know, things like that nature. It's actually important that you have access to multiple sources of black mana. And there's no guarantee that you'll draw multiple Blood Crypts or Overgrown Tombs. So that's the reason I actually like leaving Sylvan Caryatid in here. It's not great, but it's okay.
Okay. You think there's no argument for splitting? You just do one or the other?
I think you can make an argument for splitting, actually. I think you can. I hadn't really considered that, so.
Because I can definitely respect the black mana argument, but it seems like you'd rather draw 1 Elvish Mystic and 1 Caryatid than 2 of either.
Sure.
And in a lot of games, it's going to be close which one you would prefer to draw because there's a lot of variables.
Yeah, sure. No, I can definitely see that. What we do know for sure is that things get really good for Justin after sideboard.
Yeah, there's a lot of haymakers here.
Yeah.
And game 1, you know, a lot of these threat cards, these Gorkland Rampagers and Pulachronos type cards that are just really powerful Magic cards in general aren't very good against blue-white control. So you do have some pretty easy cuts to make, even though it's not like you're removing bad Magic cards from your deck. They're just not that well suited to fight against Supreme Verdict, Detention Sphere, counter spells, and the like.
Now, as good as things did look for Parnell in Game 1, and, you know, Game 2 and Game 3 presumably get much better, we have seen blue-white control really, you know, destroy some people with just a draw of, you know, turn 3, you know, some sort of sphere effect, turn 4 Jace, plus or minus it, turn 5 something, turn 6 Elspeth. This deck is very capable of putting a game away very quickly.
Oh, easily. And that game, if Justin's missing any piece of the puzzle there, he probably loses, even though his hand was as good as you could realistically expect Game 1. You know, he had a fast Domri, he had a Stormbreath Dragon on time, you know, a lot of his most powerful elements. Joe's hand at the end of the game was very good. If he had 1 extra turn of breathing space, he could have fired off a big rev and probably taken that game over.
Yeah, I think all that Joe really needed there was just a turn of reprieve, and he just didn't get one. That's all. He's just always under the gun the entire time, but, you know, that's what Domri will do to you. By plussing and always giving you fuel makes it so that you don't get that turn of reprieve. So we'll see if he gets a turn of reprieve this go-around, as he will be on the play here. Big tournament for him. Looks like he feels, I mean, you can just tell now, just looking at him. When we saw him last week, you could tell he was really sick.
Yeah, no, he was not okay. It was obvious in the sound of his voice, the way he was even just moving around. He was not a player playing at 100%. Looks a lot better.
Yeah. So much so that he just decided to leave. He just doesn't want to play anymore.
Yeah. He's accomplished all that he set out to do this weekend. Won his first 2 rounds. Now down a game, not really interested in playing the tournament
Not really
anymore.
a good feeling to pick up a loss to Pulachronos and friends. I could understand where he's coming from.
I'm done here.
Yeah.
No, what actually is happening here most likely is that Joe is taking a short break.
No, he's done. No. It's no more.
Well, he would have at least brought his deck with him if he was leaving, I would imagine.
He's blowing his nose, we're being told now. The magic of live TV, a nose blow taking place off camera here. So we're going to come back to us where we are not blowing our nose. Cedric Phillips, Patrick Sullivan, Star City Games Open Series here in Knoxville. Blue-White Control got second place last weekend in the hands of Eric Rill, who's also 2-0 again with his 75 this particular weekend. Do you like Blue-White, or do you like dabbling like Christopher O'Brien did with Red or the Esper Splash?
Right now, I'd probably just play blue-white because it's not clear to me what tools you want. Metagame's still a little bit in flux right now. I think that adding the 3rd color makes a lot of sense when you know, oh, there's a lot of control. I definitely want Thoughtseize. Or there's beatdown decks all over the place. I want to be splashing Anger of the Gods in the sideboard. Once you have that kind of information, I like going into a 3rd color quite a bit. But right now, I would prioritize just having lands that come into play untapped, playing a bunch of counter spells and trying to build the deck that way.
Yeah, a lot of untapped lands in the blue-white version here. You see 3 plains and 7 islands for Joe, 10 untapped lands as opposed to Esper, who has their 12 temples and very, very few untapped lands. Maybe they find room for 1 or 2, but that makes you have a pretty poor aggressive matchup as a result. So blue-white control certainly looks appealing. Again, Christopher O'Brien's deck list that he made top 4 with in Cincinnati last weekend, designed by Tomohiro Saito, also appealing. You got Firemind's Foresight and some other, Firemind's Insight, I think it's called, Foresight perhaps, kind of blanking on the card name here. here, but the 7-mana instant that lets you search for a 1-mana, a 2-mana, and 3-mana spell. Certainly really powerful card. Pretty cute as well. Temple Epiphany kind of tying the room together there as well. I know a lot of people liked that deck list. I don't know exactly how good it is at this point, but O'Brien picking it up last weekend, making the top 4, leads me to believe that it's probably pretty good.
Well, there's a lot of really good Izzet cards, like Izzet Charm, for example. Turn Burn is a potent weapon. Anger the Gods in the sideboard if you want it. There's a lot of, Izzet Staticaster, Ral Zarek, not that he was playing those cards, but there's a lot of powerful cards to choose from in blue-red. So Assemble Legion in the sideboard, another potentially attractive option as well.
Can we get a Ral Zarek deck in this format? How does that card come out and no one plays it? The entire time. It's unacceptable to me. I'm sorry.
Well, there's a lot of really good... I mean, it lines up pretty poorly against nearly every threat in Jund monsters. And it's not really that exciting against control decks either. I think that's the biggest problem.
Look, I know. It's just a cool card I want to see play. That's all. That's all I'm asking. Here's an Elvish Mystic.
I wouldn't mind flipping some coins.
Absolutely. That'd be good for the camera.
Yeah.
Got Temple of Enlightenment here from Joe, along with an island. Just going to pass the turn back over to Parnell. See if he's got turn 2 Planeswalker here. Going to play over to him untapped very quickly, so it leads me to believe it probably does. And there is the Domri. There is a Syncopate. So good answer to have there for Lossett, as Domri caused a lot of problems last game.
Joe off to a much better start. Again, just not falling behind early on and trying to allow his more powerful tools to take over.
See the Attention Sphere in Lossett's hand right now as well. So we'll see what Parnell has. He's going to play a Stomping Ground untapped. What's the follow-up going to be? There is a copy of Gore-Clan Rampager. Will that resolve? It looks like the answer is yes. As I said, we'll take a draw here. It looks like he picked up another copy of Revelation, but what it is I don't think it's a 4th land.
Yeah, Joe is playing 27.
Yep.
Which is pretty close to the industry standard at this point, but this blue-white deck's so hungry for lands, can't really afford to miss land drops early on in the game.
Looks like going to play Detention Sphere to take care of that Gore-Clan Rampager. I'm sure that's not what he wants to use it on, but given the situation, he almost has to, as Parnell picks up a copy of Blood Crypt. He's going to play Temple of Abandon first, however. Going to take a look at the top card. That's going to the bottom. What's the follow-up going to be? How about another copy of Gore-Clan Rampager? He says, pass the turn back over to Lossett, who draws a card. It's an Archangel of Thune. And it's a very powerful card, is the Archangel, but it's not a land. Passes it back over to Parnell.
Not only does Joe need a land, but he needs a specific land, too. He does not have double white currently, so it's not even just finding any sort of land, because there's a lot of lands that do not do the trick right now.
Now, the one thing about Parnell's hand, it's not very good. He's got 2 copies of Sylvan Caryatid. That's it, as Lossett does draw a card, and it's an island. See if Lossett has the Jace in his hand. And if he does, how does he want to use it? Again, he does not have the 2nd white mana to be able to cast a Supreme Verdict of that Archangel. It looks like he does have the 4-mana Planeswalker, however, and he is going to take this down. So 3 cards coming in Island, another copy of Jace, and a Mutavault. How to split him is the question.
It's a tough split. Joe's been missing lands for a long time, so your normal instinct in this spot is just to split Jace against 2 lands, but, it's not clear you can really afford to give Joe 2 lands here. But can you afford to give him a land and a Jace? I mean, this is a tough spot.
And it looks like it might be Jace versus. We'll see exactly what Parnell wants to do. You see, he's got the cards in his hand, giving this some consideration. As you mentioned, it's not as easy as it looks.
I think if there was a Plains in this pile, Justin could easily split this Plains against 2 cards.
Yeah, for sure.
But since that isn't the case here, it makes the split much more challenging.
Also, let's not forget, one thing about Joe's deck list as well is that he's got that one Godless Shrine in here that does act as a Plains and then a swamp for a Nightveil Spectre, but at the same time, he has to take 2 damage to be able to play that untapped, for example. That could actually end up mattering in this game.
For sure. And it mattered in the first game as well. I mean, he had to play that Godless Shrine untapped, so those lands aren't free. There's only 1 Godless Shrine in the list, but it definitely came up.
Parnell giving this a lot of thought. Again, this is a pretty tough decision at this point in the game. It would be easy to split land versus spells here, but again, that's a Jace. That would be the spell. And again, when your opponent's missing land drops, it makes it tough.
You may not want to give him 2 lands here. I could see Jace versus lands or Mutavault against Jace Island as the logical splits.
Well, the 2 lands are going to go to Lossett's hand. Parnell's going to draw himself a card again. He's got 2 Sylvan Caryatids in his grip. He's going to play a Temple of Abandon off the top. Top card is going to the bottom again, so Lossett is fading some big draws here from Parnell. If, for example, a card like Sire from Sandy was in hand, this game would basically be over.
Yeah. Mistcutter Hydra would be extremely powerful here. There's There's a lot of haymakers in Justin's list from here.
Parnell's got to decide how he wants to attack her, and it looks like Gorkline Rampage is going to go after the Jace. You could make an argument for Elvish Mystic going after Jace, because then Jace would be able to tick down and really be able to tick up, and he'd be able to get 4 damage across, as Lossett does pick up a copy of Temple of Enlightenment, but he decided to send the Rampager over to the Planeswalker, saying, I want to get that thing off the table here, as Joe scries a Syncopate right to the bottom of his deck.
Giving Joe 3 fresh looks at untapped white mana is too dangerous for Justin there. So even though giving up 4 damage is really painful, I think he's correct in getting Jace off the table in that spot.
Justin draws his card. It's a copy of Courser of Krufix. We'll see exactly what he wants to do with that. Step 1 is attacking, however. Going to put Lossett down to 9. And does he want to deploy the Courser at this point? Again, two Sylvan Caryatids in his hand that don't matter. And he's just going to pass the turn back here, kind of pacing. How do you feel about not playing the Courser here?
I'm a big fan. I think the writing's on the wall that you're going to get hit by a Supreme Verdict next turn. It's very certain, and then that Courser could be valuable for rebuilding.
Lossett with a momentary pause there. I think he considered casting a Sphinx's Revelation for 1, drawing a card and going up to 10, but opted against it. Just draws his card instead, thinking that Sphinx's Revelation is reserved for bigger things at this point, as Joe's going to tap some mana. You see Parnell's ready to put his creatures in the graveyard, and there is a Supreme Verdict, so a little 2-for-1 there on the Wrath effect. And now Lossett is going to play a land. We know he's got a Mute Vault and an island, and it looked like he picked up another blue-white land as well.
Yeah, figuring out exactly which lane he wants to play here. I think I like playing the Mutavault over the island, but playing the tapped Hollow Fountain here is fine as well.
And Hollow Fountain is what he goes with, as Parnell does pick up a card for the turn. Looks like it may have been another copy of Gorkline Rampager, not too sure. Again, the Jund Monsters player holding on to those 2 Caryatids and that Courser of Krufix. He could have played last turn, but chose not to.
Well, now there's a good spot to redeploy. For example, you can cast the Courser, maybe be able to play a land for free, and also add the Sylvan Caryatid.
Yeah, the one big thing here is that he's not really picked up any of his sideboard cards. He's got a lot of high impact ones. Going to start with the Courser. There's a Blood Crypt. That's going to come into play untapped. Going to take 2 and then gain 1 from the Courser. So he's going to go down to 13, Will Parnell. Top card is an Elvish Mystic, so almost kind of drawing the bad half of his deck right now, as there's a Sylvan Caryatid. He's going to play the other one as well.
And he's carried several cards to the bottom in all of this as well, so his deck should be pretty flush with high impact cards at least.
The second to draw a card is copy of Banishing Light. Again, we know about the Archangel of Thune in his hand, and actually this is a pretty juicy spot for Archangel, you could argue. There's a Mutavault.
Yeah, you can be pretty confident that there's not something like Stormbreath Dragon hanging out in his hand. Down to 1 card, you know he's drawing a blank or pretty close to a blank next turn. It's not a bad spot. Also a pretty powerful spot for Elspeth as well, so Joe with a variety of good options.
Heck, even passing and revving isn't so bad at this point, I don't think.
No, there's nothing wrong with that either.
Yeah.
I think Joe would prefer to play some stuff to the board and then rev down the line, but
Be a little more proactive at this point.
yeah. Give yourself an opportunity to make more land drops for the rev to be even bigger and just exhaust Justin's resources.
It's a pretty nice window, too, as you did mention, simply because of the Elvish Mystic being on top of Parnell's deck. You know exactly what's coming, and it's not some crazy card. At least you can assume that.
Yeah, you had to, I mean, maybe you could think he could have something like Dreadbore or Mizzium Mortars left over in his hand. That's not impossible. But in terms of it being a Mistcutter Hydra, you would be stunned if that was the card left over at this point.
So we'll see what number 4 on our Season 2 Open Series leaderboard wants to do on this turn. Again, he's looking at that Archangel. He's got a Rev in his hand. He's got Elspeth as well. A lot of options here for the blue-white control player.
And if Parnell's card left over here is the Gorkline Rampager, then Archangel is a pretty rough play this turn.
5. Looks like he wants to play the Archangel. Maybe he wants to play the Elspeth. Looks like he wants to leave Mutavault available here. You can definitely see he's a little bit unsure of himself. You know, one thing about Joe, when you watch him play Miracles, for example, very sure of his decisions. You know, maybe it takes a little bit of time to come to the appropriate conclusion, but he's very sure of what he wants to do. You can see a little bit of the inexperience here with playing blue-white control, just because, you know, again, a more familiar player, maybe like Eric Rill, would know exactly what they'd want to do.
Yeah. It's tough. You know, there's some upside to playing the Archangel just because you get to play Elspeth next turn and definitely lock the game up, but I like this play a little bit better from Joe. It just protects him slightly better against. If Justin has a card in his hand that you care about, it's a removal spell, something like Dreadbore, and it's just much better to make the 3 tokens and then have Elspeth eat the removal spell, clearing the path for the Archangel than the other way around.
Blood Crypt going to come in and play tapped here. Parnell going to gain a life. And you see Abrupt Decay, the top card of his deck, finally drawing one of his sideboard cards. Here comes the Courser at Elspeth.
So this is a, hey, I have Rampager attack, although I guess Justin would kind of attack regardless here. But
Yeah. I think this would be the attack no matter what. And I think that Joe only has to play around one card at this point, which is Rampager. Now, how do you block? I mean, arguments can be made.
Well, the easiest thing to do, I think, is just triple block. Because even if he has Rampager, your Elspeth survives. If you block with only one, then Rampager kills it.
Sure. Is it better a triple or just double then? At that
Double,
point?
okay, yeah, double's fine. Just, I would not single block, I guess is my point.
Parnell with a spell. It's an Elvish Mystic. And just has to pass the turn back, so the card in his hand must not be too relevant at all, as Lossett's going to draw a card here. He drew a Dissolve. That's a pretty big draw at this point. Doesn't counter the Abrupt Decay, of course, but can take care of the next big spell here from Parnell.
And the Abrupt Decay might not matter that much. By the time that Justin's able to unlock this Rampager and have it matter, Joe may be gaining a bunch of life and making a bunch of large tokens with Elspeth and his copy of Archangel of Doom.
And part of the reason I think that Joe played the Elspeth last turn is the fact that he could play an 8th land, play Archangel, and then have a 3-mana spell available. Sure, he drew the Dissolve, but he could have played the Banishing Light this turn as well, and then 2 spells in one turn, emptying his hand a little bit lower, and then resolving a big Revelation.
Yeah. So very good use of resources here.
He just had to make it out of that last turn alive, which he very clearly did, as Parnell is going to draw a copy of Abrupt Decay. Now, there's a copy of Rakdos Return, but that one is kind of trumped by the Dissolve in the grip, as Parnell hides the Rakdos Return with his hand. But that one is coming, and Joe knows about it now.
And even if we were looking at a Dissolve in Joe's hand, Joe's board next turn might be too much that it wouldn't even really matter very much.
Yeah, Rakdos Return is definitely a time-sensitive card.
Yeah.
So now Parnell is actually the one that's in a difficult spot at this point. And, you know, it's unfortunate for him because he definitely had a window to take advantage of things, and his draws just did not cooperate at all.
Yeah, no, he flooded out a little bit and had a couple turns here where if he had found Stormbreath Dragons and Mistcrypto Hydras or even Planeswalkers, maybe this would be different, but now we're here.
So you do see some attacking here from Parnell, the Elvish Mystic, and the Courser coming in. Lossett again going to decide exactly how he does want to block. Just has to be cognizant of Gore-Clan Rampager at this point. And it looks like it's just going to be chump blocks on each.
And now with Elspeth at the 6th loyalty, the Rampager through Courser is no longer a factor, so Joe can afford to just single block. He doesn't really want to get this Archangel involved in combat, of course, because that's going to be the way that he wins this game, more than likely.
Haven't seen Archangel within the sideboards for a little while. This was something that was really popular, you know, from Alexander Hayne and some other players. Just Archangel really just taking down the competition. Think of Grand Prix Vancouver, really kind of its breaking out party, but not so much recently. Looks like it's going to take over this game, though.
It's one of those things where when everyone's doing it, you don't want to be doing it, and vice versa.
Yeah.
Because, you know, if these red beatdown decks or Jund Monsters lists are leaving in a couple of Mizium Mortars in after against you post board, and you have an Archangel and they have the Mortars, it's really bad for you. But if you're ever getting it the other way around, where they have Mortars and you have no Archangels in your list, or you have Archangels and they have no Mortars, that's super good. So you want to be swimming against the tide is kind of my opinion on that one.
The Archangel does come across with 3 points of damage. Parnell's going to go down to 10. Lossett goes up to 12. You see the trigger from the Archangel making everything a little bit bigger. Abrupt Decay going to take care of that Detention Sphere. Gore-Clan Rampager back on Parnell's side. But Parnell is in a world of trouble as those creatures are large. Elspeth is threatening its ultimate. Archangel's out there. And let's not forget that Lossett just has a ton of mana available for a Revelation.
Yeah. And this is why you cannot afford to skip a beat against blue-white control, because once they get control of the game, it's very hard for them to let it up.
Stomping Ground going to come into play here for Parnell. He's going to gain a life. Top card is an Overgrown Tomb, so that'll be his draw for the next turn. That's not very helpful. We know about the copy of Rakdos' Return, but at this point, as you did mention, that one's not very helpful either.
No. That ship has sailed.
And it's not even so much that there's a Dissolve in Lossett's hand. Imagine there is no Dissolve. Sure, Rakdos Return resolves.
Sure.
I've got this sweet Archangel and these tokens. Can you beat those? It looks like the answer is probably no now.
I suspect Joe would fight over a big Rakdos Return here, but you are right that it's not a requirement.
Yeah, if there was no Dissolve, I think he would still be okay, as here's an attack over towards Elspeth from Parnell. The Rampager and the Courser going that way.
And Joe even here could say, you know what? I'll let this through. This is not even lethal on my Elspeth. It looks like he is going to make a block, but Joe doesn't even need to do that. I imagine we're going to see a double block on both attacking creatures if Joe is willing to block. But you could easily imagine Joe saying, like, okay, all right, Elspeth's down to 1 loyalty. I have a dissolve for your leftovers. If you want to spend your turn attacking and using Rampager, that's fine. I can just kill you on the way back.
Sure. Definitely arguments to be made there. They see Parnell's going to go tapping some mana here, and there is a Rampager on the Rampager to work its way over some of these blockers.
The larger point here is that Joe's got this locked up in several different ways.
Yeah, he's doing quite well for himself right now. It seems like it's only a matter of time for Mr. Lossett before we do head over to game number 3 here. Don't know if there's a way out of this. Especially, the thing about Courser, too, as good as a card as that is, the fact that it provides information to your opponent is really a big deal. The fact that Lossett knew that the turn that Elvish Mystic was on top of the deck, wow, Elspeth is pretty safe to cast here.
It definitely matters a lot against jump monsters in the post-board games because they have these haymakers and then airballs in their deck. So when you know that, okay, they're drawing Elvish Mystic next turn, I can afford to tap out for this chase. Those are big swings for the way the blue-white player gets to navigate the games.
Fun little interaction here between Sphinx's Revelation and Archangel of Thune. Losett's going to cast a Rev for 3. It's going to draw 3 cards. More importantly, it's going to gain 3 life, which is going to trigger the Archangel, and everybody's going to get a little bit bigger here on the blocks.
This is the first time in Joe's life he's ever cast a pump spell.
Chances are high. Yeah, chances are very high that's the case.
I don't know if this technically counts, but...
Well, this is the kind of pump spell he's going to cast, so yeah, this is what counts for him. You see some creatures are going to bite the dust here, but those soldiers become 3/3s. Here's a Rakdos return. This is probably going to be a dissolve on that. We'll see. And there is your dissolve. Time for Lossett to do a little bit of scrying. Archangel of Thune is the card that he looked at, so he's going to quickly untap and draw. And Parnell says, actually, you don't get to do that at all. I'll concede this game. We'll head to a 3rd one.
A lethal attack coming across there, a lot of damage, 18 some odd points of damage there. So Justin's just going to try to win the 3rd game instead.
We'll be moving on to game number 3 of round 3 here in Knoxville in just a little bit. Patrick Sullivan, Cedric Phillips, along with Nick Miller in the sideboard and the rest of the SCG Live crew. We appreciate you guys joining us. A lot of options out there for Magic to watch, so we truly do appreciate you guys tuning in here of our Standard Open. Hopefully you guys will join us for our Legacy Open tomorrow on Mother's Day. Should be a lot of fun, as you do see Joe Lossett and Justin Parnell doing battle here. We've got over 7,000 viewers, so thanks, guys. Do appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
At SCG Live, hashtag SCGKNOX for your tweets. Some people want to see Andrew Snyder on camera. He's already 3-0. He's got a great smile, so why don't we put him on? Well,
it's fine by me.
There's a chance that'll happen. We know we'll see him tomorrow.
Right, that's the thing.
With the old blue-red Delver deck.
We often keep our powder dry when we have spots where we know we're going to feature someone in the other format. So.
And chances are he's going to do some winning tomorrow. He's a machine with that deck.
Yeah. Well, if he keeps winning, of course, that's in play for today as well.
Oh, certainly live. So, we've got a Platypus Jedi on Twitter said, I mentioned Mistcutter Hydra was good against blue-white. Is it still good now that Banish Light and Reprisal are around? Reprisal card we haven't seen in any sideboard yet.
And the answer is it's still good.
Yeah?
It's less good, but they take a big hit, they untap, they had to spend mana in their own main phase, banishing lighting. It's like, those are the kind of exchanges you saw in game 1, where it wasn't like Joe couldn't respond to all the threats, although eventually the Domri went ultimate there. It was more of an issue of he had to tap out on his own turn to catch up, and then every haste creature and every planeswalker is a huge deal. So I think that Mistcutter Hydra certainly is a little bit less powerful, but worthy of sideboard slots all the same.
Sure, I forgot about Reprisal being a card.
Yeah.
In the new set. It kind of just flies under the radar. It's an incredibly powerful reprint that I think is going to have an impact on Standard.
Yes.
Really good card against Jund Monsters and some other things out there. Desecration Demon as well. So wouldn't be surprised to see those start making their way into sideboards, not just the blue-white control or the Revelation decks, but just other decks in general. It's a really good tool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now again, if you kind of keep track of that last game that we watched there, Parnell kind of stumbled and fumbled a little bit, got off to a decent start, but didn't do anything too crazy. Part of the reason he lost that match, truth be told, is that he didn't draw sideboard cards.
No.
The sideboard cards, he's got so many and they're all so powerful, but he didn't find any of that game.
Although even still, by the time that game ends, the sideboard cards don't matter very much. So it's not even just about having them, but having them on time. Because once blue-white shuts the door, it doesn't really matter what else you find.
Yeah, makes it really, really tough. And, the set got ahead there, and actually got to be the one kind of dictating how things went. You kind of could tell and could kind of feel the game change on the Elspeth turn, where he had the option to cast Elspeth or Revelation or Archangel of Thune. When he's the one dictating things, that's when the Jund Monsters player is likely losing.
Yeah. Needs to get out in front fast and force Joe to respond on his own turn. That's the recipe.
And one thing to keep in mind as well, too, as we talked about during the sideboarding is, I advocated bring out all the Elvish Mystics. You were kind of advocating a split of Sylvan Characters versus Elvish Mystics. Well, we saw 2 Characters and 1 Mystic that game, so it makes you wonder how many mana accelerants Parnell kept in. Does he have all 8? Did he split as you advised, 2 and 2? We know that he definitely didn't board out all the Elvish Mystics, so we'll see. As those cards, they do have an impact over the course of the game, but they really get weak, too, because drawing 2 Characters there was pretty bad.
Of course, Krufix, another low-impact threat that Justin's still on his list. So I'm pretty sure we can safely assume Palakronos has been removed from the list.
Some number.
Scavenging Ooze, pretty likely as well. But a lot of the cards on the fringe that you and I both anticipated getting removed were still in Justin's deck in Game 2.
Well, we're going to get Game 3 underway here with a Temple of Abandon. Time for Mr. Parnell to scry. That top card, he's going to consult his hand before deciding if it's going to go to the top or the bottom. And it is going to go to the top. Over to Lossett we do go. You see, Joe does have some lands this game. Here's a Temple of Enlightenment to start things off. Supreme Verdict is the card he's looking at. Going to consult the grip. Going to leave that one on top. Pretty good place for that spell.
Hard to imagine Joe's hand being good enough to get rid of that card.
A Blood Crypt tapped for Parnell before passing the turn back. Joe will pick up that copy of Supreme Verdict. You see a Mutavault and a Plains there, doing us a favor here in the booth. Every time you see one of those disgusting white bordered cards, we know he has land in his hand. Disgusting for me, at least.
Those were the lands from my childhood.
Those were his, too. Yeah. That's why he plays with them. See what Lossett wants to do in a second turn here. Giving a lot of thought on a second land drop. Could be a Mutavault, could be a land that comes into play tap, could simply be a basic and represent Syncopate, which did take care of a Domri last game.
Yeah. I still don't rot those lands, even though they were from when I was a kid. I'm just saying. There is some nostalgia value there for me.
A Blind Obedience on turn number 2 here from Lossett. Very great answer to Mistcutter Hydra as well as Stormbreath Dragon. And there's a Sire of Insanity revealed off of the Courser of Krufix from Parnell. So some information gained for Lossett. He's going to have to plan carefully around that card now.
Like you mentioned, the information very valuable for Joe in these games.
Lossett with a copy of Temple of Enlightenment in his hand at the ready. See if he wants to deploy that. It looks like he's going to. Time for him to scry. Detention Sphere is the card he's looking at. He already has a sphere in his hand, along with 2 copies of Supreme Verdict. So what does he want to do with this? Really powerful card in this matchup, but you have to be aware that your opponent has plenty of answers to it as well.
And Joe's probably going to end up being a lot more aggressive tapping out this game because of the Blind Obedience. He no longer has to worry as much about haste threats tagging him.
Elvish Mystic revealed to the Courser. Sire of Insanity added to the grip for Parnell. He's got a backup Courser there, a couple of other cards. Looks like he may have a copy of Xenagos. He's going to start by attacking for 2. Lossett's going to go down to 18. Parnell going to play a Stomping Ground, and now there is a Courser. So it seems like a little bit of maybe in the wrong order there, because he could have gained another life off of the Courser. Not something not something that's major, because his life total doesn't really play a big role in this matchup, but it looked like it may have been a bit of a hiccup there.
Well, not necessarily, because it's possible. Oh, did he play the Stomping Ground tapped before combat?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just a minor thing. You see, Lossett has a Temple of Silence in his hand here. And again, we know he has a Detention Sphere in his hand that he could use to take care of both of those Coursers. Pretty appetizing.
Well, he also has to know that Justin is aware of Detention Sphere, so why does Justin want me to tap out?
Yeah, maybe inducing.
Yeah, and maybe clearing the path for a Planeswalker of some sort.
Parnell's top card is a mystery, and there is the Planeswalker he's clearing the path for. It is a copy of Xenagos the Reveler. He's going to make a Satyr token and attack here for 2. And you already see Lossett is untapped because he's actually not going to get to attack for 2 because of the Blind Obedience, so not as good as it should be.
Blind Obedience does all sorts of work in this matchup.
Yeah. I was prepared for Lossett to be 2 less, and that's not the case here.
Although Joe's hand is pretty weak here. It looks like it's just a counterspell and a Supreme Verdict, but nothing else to do.
Lossett just going to pass the turn back. Mutavault able to chip away over at that Xenagos. So now it's actually the Satyr token is probably priced in and staying back on defense, which is very strange. Parnell going to draw his card for the turn. You see a land was added to the grip. He's working his way towards that Sire of Insanity that Lossett does know about. Lossett cannot let that thing get into play or the game essentially ends on the spot.
And these are the tough spots when you're playing a deck like Gem Monsters against Blue White Control. There's so many cards you have to play around. It's not even just individual cards you have to play around, but the pacing of the game. Do you want to play a slow 1-for-1 game and try to beat things like Supreme Verdict, knowing that you risk losing to Revelations? Or do you want to play a really fast game trying to beat Revelations so that you risk losing to Supreme Verdict? It's very hard.
There's a real tension there as Parnell is going to tap some mana. This is an Elvish Mystic. It'll come into play tapped. He's going to actually move the elevator up here on the Xenagos. Going to add some mana to his mana pool. A combination of green and red. Going to play this untapped. Looks like he is going for Sire of Insanity this turn, and he is going to drop that down. Does the set have a dissolve for this? The answer is yes.
So why is Justin making a play this aggressive, you may ask? Because he has Storm Breath in his hand. He just needs to wade through these counter spells.
Yep. And I actually like that line of play there from Justin, because if Joe doesn't have the counter spell, it's essentially lights out. And if he does, okay, well, we can just keep playing.
Yeah, life goes on.
A Jace Architect of Thought picked up here for Lossett. Again, he's still in some trouble.
The Blind Obedience does give him a lot of a cushion.
That's true. The combination of that and a Mutavault, pretty nice here as far as defense is concerned.
He also has to worry about Justin just ripping an Abrupticate from spot 2. I mean,
Very
that's another
real.
thing that Joe has to try to play around as best as he can here.
This is a Supreme Verdict. That's going to clear everything up. This is Mutavault taking care of Xenagos. A pretty nice turn there from Lossett. Shields are essentially down here, so a card like Rakdos' return would actually be pretty good. We'll see if Parnell can find one. And this is a Stormbreath Dragon that comes into play tap due to Blind Obedience. Has to pass the turn back, so nothing too threatening at this point.
And Joe's hand just lands and this Jace right now.
Well, I guess it's time for Jace to get some work done here now, isn't it? As Lossett's going to organize those lands. You can definitely see the cost of playing a couple extra Scry lands here this game as well. Looks like Joe may be considering a Jace with the Blind Obedience Extort trigger and the ramifications of using that mana.
Problem is that in that world, Jace basically just becomes divination.
That might not be so bad at this point. I mean, it's a very expensive divination for 5 mana, but he might be okay with that.
And it's not clear Joe can squeeze out much more value than that.
Uh-huh.
That might be the ceiling on what he can do.
And there is your 5 mana. And this is your Jace plus an Extort trigger. So the set is going to go up to 19. Parnell's going to go down to 17. Jace is going to tick down. This is, as you mentioned, over a glorified divination, but it's a pretty darn good one. Celestial Flare, Negate, and Elspeth. Elspeth goes by itself immediately from Parnell.
Not even a moment's hesitation there.
No.
Can't believe him also. Elspeth is so powerful in general and specifically here.
So here's the question. What do you want to take if you're Lossett? You see a hand of 3 lands.
I think that you probably had to take Elspeth here because there's no guarantee your Celestial Flare is any good against the Stormbreath Dragon.
I guess, well, here's the situation, right, where he's going to take the Flare and the Dragon because there's no way that a haste creature can get in the way now because of Blind Obedience. So this actually kind of puts the brakes on the Dragon because you know that your Jace isn't going to die.
I thought that Joe had already played a land this turn.
No.
This is why. Okay. Then this play is much better.
And Joe will have to pay 2 to play the Hollow Fountain on tap, but now he's representing Negate and Celestial Flare, which is actually pretty good as Parnell draws a card for the turn. It looks like he's going to come across here. This is going to probably buy out the Flare from Lossett, and it will. So a healthy exchange. Here's a Domri from Parnell. Take a look at the top cards. The elevator moves up to 4. And that's not going to help him, but that could be one of the many great spells he has after sideboard.
And the reason that Justin had to do that way, even though that looked bad, was the alternative is don't attack and cast Domri into the negate. So he kind of has to lose the dragon to be able to resolve this Domri here.
Syncopate versus the split on the Jace. Lossett immediately takes that Syncopate, which is actually pretty gosh darn good right now. Now he's just got to contend with that Domri that's on the table, but it's not too threatening at this point, and Mutavault can certainly do some work on it, so Domri's going to go down to 2. Lossett has not played a land yet this turn, but it looks like he's about to in Temple of Deceit. So a little Scry. Hollowed Fountain to the bottom. Lossett with a Negate and a Syncopate, along with the Jace in his hand, happy to pass the turn back. You can tell that things are turning in Lossett's favor right now.
Commanding position. Little susceptible still to miscounter Hydra potentially, even given that Blind Obedience is in play, as it's a large set that can't be countered, but Joe has to be very happy with how this game is going.
Domri going to reveal a Sylvan Caryatid. You can see Parnell's hand, a Stormbreath Dragon, Rakdos' return, along with a Miscutter Hydra. The problem is Blind Obedience. It's really a big one. It's really funny because the Blind Obedience is this card where it's not great all of the time. However, it's pretty gosh darn good right now. It looks like a Syncopate is going to take care of this Sylvan Caryatid with an Extort trigger.
And I like this play from Joe. Mana matters a lot. The 0-3 locks down the Mutavault as a blocker, so it makes the Domri a lot more stable. So this, even though it looks a little weird, I like this play from Joe.
Yeah, I think the thought process there might be, you know, I really just want to go to work after on your Domri.
And additionally, what also happens there is now you know that Justin can't play a blocker next turn because of the blind obedience, so your Mutavault's guaranteed to finish off Domri next turn.
And the other thing, too, is Joe's able to play a Jace and have negate at the ready for a card like Rakdos Return. So this is beautiful management of mana and resources by Joe. You see the Jace is going to come into play. He's going to take it down. Cards are coming. Island, along with another copy of Mutavault, and a Temple of Silence for Lossett. Mutavault versus is the choice. Mutavault's going to go to the grip. Other two cards are going to go to the bottom. And since Lossett has already played his land, he has to pass the turn back over to Parnell. He's going to take his Domri up to 2. Top card stays on top. A lot of the time in the sideboarded games, Patrick, Domri not going to hit a creature because you bring in a high density of spells.
Yeah, you mentioned Abrupt Decay, Golgari Charm, Rakdos Return, a long list of spells coming in.
Parnell going to play a Storm Breath Dragon. However, it's going to come into play tapped. He's just waiting to see if it does resolve. There it is. Does come into play tapped along with the Blood Crypt. Passes the turn back over to Lossett, who's going to probably get to work with that Mutavault, and he just picked up a copy of Elspeth.
Huge swing for Joe here.
Makes it look easy, doesn't it?
Yes. Well, this one is pretty easy.
You see him counting his mana too. I think 1, 2, 3. Yeah, he's able to actually play a land, cast an Elspeth, and leave negate mana up. No extort trigger necessary. Here comes your Elspeth. That thing is likely ticking down. Get that dragon out of here. Jace, where are you going? You're going up to 3. Negate still at the ready.
These have been some really efficient turns from Joe. And Blind Obedience gives him such a cushion. It's pretty insane.
Yeah, Parnell's going to play a land and a Mistcutter Hydra for 6, but it's going to come into play tapped because of Blind Obedience. And Elspeth has got that covered in numerous ways. Joe's going to start by ticking down. So we're going to find a Supreme Verdict along with a Supreme Verdict and an Island. Best of luck splitting that. And an Island along with the verdict will go over to Lossett's hand. The other verdict's going to go down to the bottom. Elspeth can make 3 chump blockers here. And the only thing I think Lossett's looking for right now is his X-Spell.
Well, it doesn't. I don't even think he needs that anymore. I think he can just win going beatdowns from this point. It would be nice. Certainly, it would be nice. I'm sure he would take it if he was able to find the Sphinx's Revelation, but by no means a requirement from this spot.
Looks like Lossett's going to go casting a verdict with the Blind Obedience Extort trigger. So there goes the Mistcutter Hydra. Wants to keep the board clear so that he can make 3 soldier tokens with Elspeth and get to work with those. Might even fire up both Mutavaults, and he will. So you said beatdowns. That's what we're doing. Parnell down to 11.
Yeah, time for Joe to shift gears here, you know. He's got a negate to hold all this off. A Blind Obedience gives him a ton of insurance and a damage race as well. Just get on the offensive here.
Instead of trying to figure out what Planeswalker he hadn't used yet, the answer was Elspeth. So there's your 3 soldier tokens. Parnell going to draw a card. Not sure if that was the Sire of Insanity or not. And it's actually just a Gorkland Rampager, so nothing too crazy going on. He still has the Rakdos Return, but he knows opponent has negate in his hand, so not able to cast that. And now Lossett picks up a copy of Archangel of Thune. And now it's probably going to be a runaway.
Yes. And the Archangel of Thune Blind Obedience combo also in play.
Ever heard of it?
Yeah.
See, Jace is going to tick up here.
So Joe just figuring out how he wants to fire up here, but pretty elementary from here.
Mutavaults, they're ready as well. In we go. 2, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's an Island. It's time to cast the Archangel. Maybe even with an Extort trigger. Gonna pass the turn back.
So Parnell basically out of it here. Again, Joe with the gate left over, commanding board. None of his creatures do anything because of the Blind Obedience.
There's a copy of Rakdos' Return. Lossett going to predictably negate that and Extort. Hey, everybody, get a little bit bigger because of the Archangel. That's fun.
That's a combo
hey,
right there.
That's fun.
That's a combo. That's how you build a deck.
That's a neat interaction. Parnell, all he can do is pass the turn back. Lossett gonna untap, take a draw, but he won't need to, as Parnell is going to concede the game. Joe Lossett, number 4 on our Season 2 Open Series leaderboard, defeats Justin Parnell 2-1. Blue-white control moving on to 3-0 and in very impressive fashion.
So in this matchup, it feels like the Jund deck is really sensitive on drawing the right amount of mana. Because it needs to make its initial land drops to threaten its 3 and 4 and 5 mana spells. It also needs to have enough just total threats to be able to overcome the blue-white control deck's defenses.
Yep.
And it felt there in the post-board games, Joe, especially game 2, Justin rather, especially game 2, didn't really have the right mixture of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's this thing where you have to draw your sideboard cards, but you also have to draw them at the right time. You know, the thing that really just ended up winning that game for Lossett is just straight up blind obedience.